all autoimmune diseases respond to it, from lupus to arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis responds not so good. It takes more time, probably because the arthritis keeps an inflammation ongoing. So it's one of the diseases that responds less well. You can do it on a standard diet. You can do it on a standard diet, but for sure, keto helps and carnivore helps even more. I suggest, if you can do it, do carnivore or at least keto and avoid the standard diet.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We have a special guest today, Dr. Leo, and forgive me if I butcher your last name, but Hanke. I'm not sure how
Hanke
to say it. Hanke, okay, very good. And you are from Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
No, from Italy.
From Italy, okay.
From Italy, yes.
For some reason, I was thinking Sweden, but maybe I'm incorrect in that. So, well, welcome and thank you for taking the time and doing this.
Thank you.
Would you be so kind as to just share your background with folks that aren't familiar with you?
Sure. So I am a medical doctor. I graduated in 2020. And after graduation, I got a master's degree in ketogenic diets. And I opened a small YouTube channel where I talk mostly about vitamin D and autoimmune diseases. And I work on the territory where I live. I do night shifts as a medical doctor for urgencies. And I'm studying to become a family doctor at the moment.
I see.
Okay. And I have multiple sclerosis since 2012.
You have multiple sclerosis in 2012. Okay. And well, first of all, congratulations on the medical progress and continued work on that. I wonder, I wanted to, this is an interesting topic, the vitamin D in particular. A lot of people seem to be deficient in vitamin D. We see there's interaction between sunlight and how we sort of hydroxylate our vitamin D and convert it to an active form. There's dietary mechanisms, either ergocalciferol or cholecalciferol, animal versus plant-based. And so when I look at a vitamin D assay, when somebody comes in, they say my vitamin D is, 25. I can't remember the units, nanograms per deciliter. I can't remember what the units are in, but and they say, well, that's a little bit low, or it's 50 and it's adequate or high. The question I have is, what are they actually measuring? Does the composition of that vitamin? Because I had mine done recently, and it was, they gave me a total. And my total was subdivided into vitamin D2 and vitamin D3, and all of my vitamin D was vitamin D3. It was like I had no vitamin D2 and all of it vitamin D3. I'm just wondering if that ratio is important, and does that impact the overall number? Are you familiar with that or aware of that?
Well, so vitamin D3 is the form of vitamin that is produced by animals. Right. And D2 is produced by plants, right. Actually by yeast. And we need, as humans, we need vitamin D3. It's much more active. D2 is not that active. And a big problem is the level of vitamin D, because there are people with autoimmune diseases who are actually resistant to vitamin D. The protocol that I'm doing to treat my multiple sclerosis is based on the concept of resistance to vitamin D. It's the problem with vitamin D is that it has a really complex way of to become active. It gets produced by the skin when we are exposed to UVB light, but then it needs two hydroxylations, two chemical reactions to occur to become active. And it needs a transporter to go from the skin to the liver, where the first hydroxylation happens. And then it has to go to the target cell, where it becomes active, and the second hydroxylation occurs. And only when it's active, it can bind to its receptor, and together they go into the nucleus of the cell and promote gene transcription. And actually, there are many people who have a resistance to vitamin D because they have a mutation in some actors involved in this activation. So you can have a mutation, for example, in the transporter or in the enzyme that activates, that does the hydroxylation, or in the receptor of the vitamin D. So there is a different response in different people. And these mutations can be hereditary, but they usually are acquired. They are caused by infections. A good example is borreliosis, Lyme disease. The Borrelia targets the vitamin D receptor. It downregulates the vitamin D receptor to weaken our immune system and to be able to chronicize. Another example is Epstein-Barr virus or cytomegalovirus. They all target our immune system to lower our immune response by lowering our response to vitamin D, and so they can live in our body. And you can actually measure if you are resistant to vitamin D. This is really interesting. And you can measure it. It's quite simple. So vitamin D has many functions. It regulates our immune system, but it also regulates our calcium level in the bloodstream. And the calcium level always needs to be constant, at a constant level. Vitamin D regulates our calcium level in the long term by increasing the absorption of calcium from the gut, from the food that we eat. But we have also a second regulation in the short term, and this regulation is made by PTH, parathyroid hormone. So to see if you are resistant to vitamin D, you first need to bring your vitamin D level at a good point, let's say over 60 nanograms per ml. And then you measure your PTH level. If you have a normal response to vitamin D, the PTH should be low because you don't need more calcium. PTH absorbs calcium from the bones, not from the intestine. So it should be in the lower third of the lab range if your response is normal. If it's higher, this means that you are resistant to vitamin D and you should consider taking higher doses.
And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the kidney also had a role in vitamin D metabolism, and that was impacted by insulin has an impact on that function as well. Is that what you understand?
Yes. So this is the classic pathway. Let's say the classic pathway is skin, liver, and kidney. But this is only the activation of the vitamin D that goes to the intestine to regulate the calcium absorption, because this was the first function of vitamin D that was discovered. And so we thought that vitamin D gets only activated by the liver and by the kidney. But this is actually not true. Vitamin D gets activated by many tissues, probably by all tissues, because we have receptors for vitamin D in all the cells of our body. And the activation in the kidney, the hydroxylation that occurs in the kidney is only for the regulation of the calcium absorption.
So, and you mentioned if you're vitamin D resistant, then you might want to ingest more vitamin D. Maybe spend more time in the sunshine. I'm not sure on that, but I know there are populations that I've seen, like for instance, African Americans tend to have lower vitamin Ds but less disease associated with it. Can you talk about why that may be? Or are you familiar with that concept?
Well, from what I know, African Americans have more autoimmune diseases than other people, because the dark skin protects the layers of the skin from the UV lights. It absorbs the melanin absorbs the UVB lights, and so they produce less vitamin D, and they should actually get more vitamin D than people with light skin.
Yeah, I guess what I saw was that I guess they're less likely to be affected by osteopenia, which is has vitamin D has a role there, and I think I should clarify that. So there may be something behind that. I mean, generally they tend to be less affected with osteopenia in general, because there's a general trend toward more lean mass that might have the effect on that. You mentioned that you're treating MS and you're looking at ketogenic diets as well, and I'm kind of curious as to how you are utilizing that. I've seen a lot of people with MS within this particular group of people who are doing carnivore diets, and they've seen some of them some very encouraging and impressive improvements. So, we talked about how vitamin D and maybe ketogenic diets have affected you with your MS.
Sure. Can I briefly share my screen and show you?
Yes, absolutely. Let me allow you to do
slide.
that. Let me show you. Let me just give you a second here. Okay, you should be able to do that now.
Okay. So this was my situation in 2016. So I had many health problems. I was obese. I had hypertension. I had all the problems associated with obesity, so knee pain, insulin resistance, and sleep apnea. Then I had intestinal problems, GI problems. I suffered from reflux, irritable bowel disease, diverticulitis, and constipation. I also suffered from depression, brain fog. I had sleep disorders, lack of concentration, memory loss, and I suffered from anxiety. And these, I think, were related to my gut microbiome. Last but not least, I had the problems associated with my vitamin D deficiency and resistance. I had a level of vitamin D in 2016 of 6 nanograms per ml, so it was extremely low. And I was always sick. I had always some sort of infection. I was always with fever. I had many infections, and my multiple sclerosis was getting really out of hand. I was having new symptoms every couple of weeks. And I was able to, so let me stop sharing. I was able to solve all these problems with first with vitamin D and then with carnivore diet. So the first thing that I did with the diet was to remove gluten, which fixed my reflux, and it improved a little bit the intestinal inflammation. But it didn't solve the problem, the other problems. In 2018, I started keto. This solved my metabolic problems. I lost 20 kilos with keto, and it improved my inflammation overall. The fatigue was less, and the mood improved. Did I stop sharing the screen, or?
It's still being shared. I can.
Oh, sorry.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I'm back. Then in 2019, I saw your podcast with Joe Rogan, and I said, well, let's try it out. And after 3 days, it fixed my sleep disorders. I woke up at really early in the morning, and I was feeling rested for the first time in my life, I think. And I was really impressed that my anxiety was gone. My anxiety was totally gone, and I had a lot of energy. And after some time, I noticed that my memory came back. I had really big problems with memory. I couldn't study anymore. And also my concentration came back. And I lost 20 more kilos. So now I am at 75 kilos, and I started at 115 in 2016. And yes, it fixed many, many problems. And the question that I had was, how is it possible that Carnivore does this? So I think I have an answer to this question. If you want, I can talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you just for my, just to sort of get an idea where you were as far as, you have MS symptomatically. I mean, because you mentioned all these other metabolic and inflammatory issues. How is the MS impacting you then? How is it objectively diagnosed? And do we have any evidence that it's improved?
Oh, so my MS began in 2012. I had optic neuritis on my left eye. Mm-hmm. And I went to the neurologist, but they didn't diagnose the MS. They told me that everything was fine. They didn't see the lesions. And I had to wait 2 years to get the diagnosis. In these 2 years, I had symptoms coming up. My memory was worsening. My attention was worsening. I was feeling tired all the time, and I began to drag my right foot. Then they diagnosed me in 2015. And then I changed neurologist. I had the brilliant idea to change neurologist and choose a neurologist who was near where I lived at the time. And this neurologist was a really bad doctor. He left me with a whole year without any therapy. And this was the reason why I got into this Coimbra protocol that uses the high doses of vitamin D. I was desperate. I didn't have any therapy, and I was looking for something to do that wasn't approved by school medicine, but I tried it out and it works. And then 1 year later, I changed the neurologist again, and I had many new lesions. I had many new lesions and many new symptoms. I was having dysesthesia in both hands. I was having night sweats. I was having Leo sign. That's like an electric shock that goes along your spine. I was having urinary symptoms. I had incontinence. I had myokemia in my calf muscles. It's a strange contraction of the muscle. And, well, I had many, many symptoms, I must say.
And I assume many of those are better now or gone.
Oh, they are all gone. They after 6 months of this protocol with high doses of vitamin D, I didn't have any symptoms anymore. And I think there is a strict relation between this vitamin D therapy and the carnivore diet. And I have a metaphor to explain how I think they interact. You can think about our immune system like a dog that has to protect us from intruders like viruses and bacteria and cancer cells and so on. And when we have an autoimmune disease, the dog doesn't recognize us and it bites us. It gets aggressive. And there are two main reasons for this behavior. The first is that the dog is not well trained. And this represents the resistance to vitamin D or the deficiency of vitamin D. Because vitamin D is needed for our immune system to work properly. But the dog could be untrained, but it could be asleep. It could be calm, even if untrained. And it needs a second factor, a trigger, to make the dog aggressive, and that's inflammation. You can think about inflammation like a stick that you use to beat the dog. And when you have both these factors, you have an autoimmune disease. And you can actually act on both sides. You can fix the inflammation and calm down the dog. So if you smoke, you have to stop smoking. If you eat an inflammatory diet, try out carnivore because it works. Or you can you can educate the dog, and you can take high doses or the right dose, let's say, of vitamin D. And let me say, this protocol is dangerous if not done properly. You really need medical advice from a physician who knows what he's doing, because high doses of vitamin D can be dangerous.
Yeah, I want to get into that, into the protocol. But first, let me ask you, I've seen at least animal studies suggesting that in the absence of exogenous cholesterol, which, as you know, vitamin D is built on a backbone of cholesterol. But in the absence of exogenous or dietary cholesterol, animals are unable to remyelinate nerve cells, which is part of the problem in MS. You know, we have this remyelination, these pockets are interfering with nerve conduction. Any thoughts on that? And is that potentially how CarnivoreDiet may impact MS in that regard?
Oh, I never thought about it, but for sure, cholesterol is essential for the immune system because it's needed to produce vitamin D, and it's essential for the nervous cells, the glia cells that get attacked by the immune system use a lot of cholesterol. So for sure, cholesterol is crucial.
And so you mentioned so I mean, you said you mentioned many plaques were seen, I guess, on MRI would be my assumption. Have you had subsequent scans to show the lessening of the plaques? Has that been done?
Yes, I had. So the biggest plaque that I had in 2016 was in my medullary plaque in C5. I had a big plaque, and it was the most recent plaque. It disappeared actually with this therapy that I started. But after starting carnivore in 2020, I thought, well, I'm feeling so much better now. I can manage my multiple sclerosis with diet, and I can lower my vitamin D intake. So I went down from 80,000 units a day at that time to 40,000 units a day. And I had a relapse, one single relapse in 6 years. But this was because I went off this protocol, I think.
So you mentioned this can be the numbers you're putting out there, 80,000 IUs of vitamin D is a pretty hefty dose. I mean, most time we're seeing things like 5,000, 10,000 being utilized. So talk about the protocol, how you determine that. Is it specific to you? Is it weight-based? I mean, and what are the concerns? You said it's dangerous. So why is it dangerous? And how did you come up with that protocol?
So this protocol uses a starting dose that depends on the disease that you have and on the weight of the person. So there are immune diseases that respond much better than multiple sclerosis. For example, thyroiditis, Hashimoto thyroiditis responds really well. And for thyroiditis, you use a dose that is between 150 and 300 units per kilo a day at the beginning of the protocol. In the case of multiple sclerosis, you begin with 1,000 units per kilo per day. So I started in 2016 with 110,000 units. But this high, and let me say, and then you measure if you come to a toxic level of vitamin D, you can measure it with PTH. Like I said before, PTH and vitamin D are related to each other. If we have a high activity of vitamin D, the PTH sinks. So if it gets too low, it's a sign that you are in a toxic level of vitamin D. And the toxicity of vitamin D is due to the fact that it increases the calcium absorption. So the risk is to have an hypercalcemia. And this is dangerous for the kidneys, hypercalcemia. And yes, you can actually die from it if you do this protocol on your own and you are not supervised and you don't do the blood work that you have to do every couple of months. It can be dangerous because of the hypercalcemia.
Do we have, are there any, can I go to the literature and look into the relationship between vitamin D and MS? Has that been looked at and done? Is there something that guided you in coming up with this protocol? Is this your protocol? Who's supervising you? How did those things evolve?
No. This protocol is called the Coimbra Protocol. It was developed by Professor Coimbra, who is really a brilliant neurologist. He developed this protocol in 2003. And there are studies now out there. There is a recent study came out a couple of months ago, made in the US by a center that cures people with this protocol since 2018. And the study was published by Michael Hollick, who actually discovered the pathway of activation of vitamin D and knows a lot of about vitamin D. And there are also other studies. There has been a publication from Germany a couple of years ago, because in Germany, there are many doctors who prescribe this therapy since, I think, 2015 or 16. And it's really diffused in Germany, this therapy. There is some material about it. If you want, I can share it.
Well, let me ask you a question before we do that. I'm sure it'd be interesting to see that. So your position is, the vitamin D is fixing a deficient immune system, is its role in MS, and then the diet is reducing the inflammation, which is also part of the disease process. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I would say so. But it does much more. The diet does much more. It's not only an anti-inflammatory diet.
Fair enough. Yeah, I agree with that. So when we look at autoimmune as a general class, and there are many diseases that fall in the autoimmune category, does vitamin D have a role in those as well, or is it unique to MS?
No, it has a role in all autoimmune diseases. Actually, with this protocol, with high doses, you can treat all autoimmune diseases. I even talked to people with type 1 diabetes who began to produce insulin again. And I know that this happens also with CarnivoreDiet. And
that would be interesting to see. And if you ever able to put me in touch with any of those people, it'd be interesting to interview those folks as well. Do you know the doses? Is this an IV protocol? Is oral, or how are you doing that?
No, it's oral. It's oral. I buy the vitamin D on Amazon. I spend 12 euros a month for my therapy. Mm-hmm. So it's extremely cheap. And you can take any kind of vitamin D that you want, but you have to be supervised by someone who knows what he's doing, as I said.
Again, he's measuring their thyroid levels. And so I assume you're preferencing the vitamin D3 as opposed to vitamin D2.
Yes, sure. Vitamin D3.
And is it possible to get a significant amount through diet? I guess you'd have to eat a lot of food.
No, you can't get your vitamin D through diet. You should. So if you are exposed to sunlight for half an hour with the back exposed to direct sun, you produce about 10,000 units of vitamin D. And then the body stops producing it. So it's a physiological dose is about 10,000 units a day. But the amount of vitamin D that we get from food is minimal, and it should not be considered, actually.
Yeah, and so you're saying 1,000, because at one point you were 115 kilograms, which is what I am today, just incidentally. So it's kind of thinking I'm probably taller than you by a fair bit, I would imagine. But so let's say, for instance, for someone like me, you would say you would recommend 115,000 IUs a day to start with. Is that how you do that?
Yes, this is how you do that. And then you have to check the vitamin D level. And no, actually, the vitamin D level is not that important. You check the PTH level and you adjust the dose based on the PTH level. And you also have to check the calcemia and how much calcium you excrete with the urine. And if it's too much, you have to lower the vitamin D intake. And with this protocol, you actually also need to lower your intake of calcium. So you cannot eat dairy, and you have to drink a lot. You have to drink at least 2.5 liters of water a day. And you also have to exercise because it increases the metabolism of the bone. So it increases the calcium absorption and the calcium deposition, but only if you exercise. So you also need to exercise.
And I assume that, and when you say exercise, I'm assuming maybe weight-bearing activity, so something that stimulates bone growth, osteoblast function as opposed to osteoclast function. I'm guessing, correct?
Yes. Sorry, Shawn, I didn't understand the question.
Well, I was just saying that the exercise you're going to do is probably weight-bearing, so strength training, things like that, if you want to stimulate bone mineral density.
Oh, well, actually, I run. I do running.
Well, that's weight bearing now, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're running, you're impacting the ground. So it's supposed to maybe swimming. You're not this. It's weight bearing. So yeah, you said you want, well, I've got a question. There's a question here. I want to ask that for one of the guests, or one of the listeners here. And so they're asking about, how people with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, how does that impact vitamin D metabolism? And do other minerals come into play? Because vitamin D, obviously, you talk about the role vitamin D and calcium, but other minerals seem to have an interplay here. Do any of those things impact this protocol, or your thoughts around vitamin D function and its use in what we're talking about now?
Yes, people with what disease? I didn't understand it.
Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Okay.
Hepatic steatosis.
Okay. Well, it for sure it impacts the activation. So I don't know actually about fatty liver disease, but I know magnesium is important in association with vitamin D. Mm-hmm. It's needed for the metabolism of vitamin D, and it also binds the excess calcium, and it decreases the possibility to form kidney stones if you have a high amount of calcium in your bloodstream. So if you take high doses of vitamin D, you should take also magnesium. That's for sure.
So is it possible to share on your screen the protocol? Do you have that available where you can look at, or is that something you said you had some resources?
I can share the site of. Let's see. One moment. Okay, this is, so let me share the screen. So this is the official site. You can see where the physicians are that prescribe it. There is a map here. Is a map. And in the US, there are some centers, as you can see. You can click on it, and then you see the doctor who prescribed it.
And so the Coimbra Protocol is specifically vitamin D, right? It's, high dose vitamin D, measuring parathyroid hormone, exercise, fluid intake, magnesium. And you mentioned CarnivoreDiet. Is that part of the Coimbra Protocol? I'm guessing.
No, it's not.
You combine
this.
Yeah. And have you seen anyone else, since you, and I don't know how public you've been with this or how much access you've had to being able to share this information. Are you seeing other people? You mentioned some type 1 diabetics that have effectively, what you're saying is reverse that or come off insulin, which I've seen a few times on a carnivore diet. And the question is, were they really truly type 1 diabetics, or what's going on? Are there different subtypes of type 1 diabetes that there are some sort of described, and so it's very interesting. So I mean, have you, like I said, I know you see you're positioning yourself to work as a general practitioner, family physician. Up to this point, what have you seen with other people? I mean, you described yourself. It sounds obviously, one of the problems with MS in particular, and if you talk to the standard neurologists, they say, well, there's different types of MS. There's, relapsing, remitting, primary progressive. Some people just automatically go into remission and maybe just fall into that category, and all this stuff is just coincidental, and we don't regard it. And they tend to their curiosity level is minimal when you start to see people. Like I've seen a number of people now that have used a carnivore diet of various types to significantly improve their MS. And are they just coincidentally all people that have this relapsing remitting form? They're just in this natural remission would occur anyway, or is there something more there? And so do you still see the same neurologist, and has he made any commentary about, hey, look, your disease seems to be getting better, and is it just luck, or is there something you're actually doing?
Oh, well, actually, I don't see the neurologist anymore.
Yeah.
Last time I've seen the neurologist 2 years ago, and it was only to renew my driving license. It's the only reason why I go to the neurologist.
So do you think there's some value in going to the neurologist? And do you think they would be receptive and say, hey, look, I don't know. It seems to me that somebody's got to be curious here. And if they treat this disease over and over again, and somebody comes in with a result that's probably quite remarkable, they might be interested in it.
Well, I have to say here in Italy, I have been laughed at by the neurologists when I told them about this therapy. Yeah. But in Germany, it's different. They have a different approach. One of the physicians, neurologists that proposed this therapy in Germany, he went to a center where the people were treated with this therapy, and a couple of days later, he stopped. He quit working for the neurology at the hospital, and he began prescribing this protocol because he saw the effects of it. And it's really incredibly effective. For the remittent recessive forms, it has 100% success. With the progressive forms, it's more difficult. It needs more time. It needs, in some cases, years to have an effect. But those are all patients who have a long story of disease, and they need to be more patient.
Yeah, well, I mean, anytime something says 100% efficacy rate, I'm always a little cautious with that, because I just, I'm just 100% until you find somebody who doesn't respond, and then it's not. So it depends on how many people you get to try it on. But it's interesting, and it's, like I said, certainly we know that vitamin D deficiency is fairly common, particularly these days. And why do you think it requires such, if you said a physiological dose is 10,000 IUs using sun exposure, why do you think the dosage required is so much higher than that? What is going on that you need 100,000 units to rectify that? And can that number come down? I mean, like you said, you tried to come off when you had a relapse, but is everybody that's doing this kind of committed to 80,000 units a day from here on out, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's because of my resistance. I actually had 2 times Lyme disease as a kid. And there is a strict relation between Lyme disease and this vitamin D resistance. And I don't know if you can get off this therapy. You can keep the disease in remission and it doesn't come up while you do this protocol. If you stop it, it will come back. So in my case, it responded very well. It took me only 6 months to respond and to get rid of all my symptoms. I talked to many patients who do this therapy, and there are patients who need a year or a couple of years to find the right dose. There are patients who take even higher doses, like 250, even 300,000 units a day, because they have a really high resistance to vitamin D. And for school medicine, they should be dead. I mean, if someone takes such a high dose of vitamin D, it shouldn't be possible if there wasn't this phenomenon of vitamin D resistance.
What are the symptoms of vitamin D toxicity? So if someone were to say they're implementing this and then maybe they're titrating up, I mean, do they recommend titrating up, or you just start out taking this massive dose to start with?
No, so don't do it. Please don't take high doses. But the symptoms of hypercalcemia are constipation. This is one of the first symptoms. Nausea, vomiting, and that's it.
Okay, so GI symptoms, basically. So if you start,
yes, GI symptoms.
Okay, and so I mean, but when you mentioned don't do that, at the same time, there's going to be people listening to this that have MS or had some autoimmune disease. They're probably going to want to try it. And so, I mean, your recommendation is the first thing you do is get screened for parathyroid levels in the light of a normal vitamin D level, which is debatable. I mean, somebody will say 50, somebody will say it's 30, some people, depending on who you talk to. So it seems, what if you've got an autoimmune disease, and you said yours was 6, which is clearly deficient by any standard, I think. What if you go in there and your vitamin D is 37 and you have an autoimmune disease? Is that related to vitamin D deficiency or vitamin D deficiency or resistance, I guess?
So a good level of vitamin D should be between 50 and 80 nanograms per ml. Lower. So there are recommendations, for example, here in Italy, where I live, they accept 20 or 30 as a good level of vitamin D, but that is only for the bone health. It's not for the health of the immune system. And actually, the action that vitamin D has on the immune system is extremely important. It downregulates the inflammatory cells, the T helper 17 cells, T helper 1 cells are downregulated, and it upregulates the T regulatory cells, which are anti-inflammatory, and it stimulates the production of the of HLA complex, which is the human leukocyte antigen complex, which is used by the immune system to recognize what is self and what is not self. So the action that it has on the immune system is extremely important, and you can have it only with a higher dose of vitamin D than the one that is enough for your bone health. So I would say get your vitamin D at a good level, let's say 50 over 50 nanograms per ml, and then check if you're resistant or not, and consider taking higher doses, but look for a physician who knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and I'm just looking because I don't know the normal range of parathyroid. It looks like it's 15 to 65 picograms per milliliter is how that's measured. You said you want your PTH to be in the lower third of that normal range. Is that correct?
Yes.
So if you get in there and you've got an autoimmune disease and you've got normal vitamin D levels, say above 50, and your parathyroid hormone is in that prescribed range, lower third of whatever, 15 to 65, so 15 to 40 or something like that, or 20 to 25 or something like that. Do you still have to increase your vitamin D level? Because you still have the disease, right?
Well, you shouldn't have the disease, actually. It's not normal that your response to vitamin D is... If you have an autoimmune disease, you usually have a higher level of PTH.
So you're saying if you have an autoimmune disease, you're almost guaranteed to have a higher level of PTH, either in the high range of normal or above normal, consistent with vitamin D resistance. Interesting. Okay. So maybe look at some people coming out there and screening for vitamin D and parathyroid hormone. What was I going to say? You said in Italy they don't take you seriously there. Do you know, as far as you said any vitamin D is fine, vitamin D3 preferentially. There's often seems to be a relationship between people that supplement vitamin D and also vitamin K, particularly K2 is one that's often talked about. Does that have a role here that you know of?
Well, it has a role for bone health. And yes, with this protocol, if you take high doses, you should also take K2. You should take a decent amount of K2. I would say 600 micrograms is a good amount. Because yes, K2 brings the calcium in excess to the bones. So if you have calcium depositions in your arteries, it goes and grabs it and it brings it to the bone. And with this protocol, you have the problem that you can, if you are not active enough, you lose bone mass. So you should do everything to keep your bone healthy. And K2 is a good way.
Yeah, it's sounding more and more. I mean, there's a protocol that a guy named Patrick uses to supposedly reverse calcification in the arteries, and he's using vitamin D3, vitamin K2. I don't think the doses are quite as high than the vitamin D level, and I think a low carb, maybe a carnivore diet. I'm not sure, and I think a few other things are in there. But it sounds like all these things are being utilized for various reasons. Including autoimmune disease. Which autoimmune diseases have you seen respond to this? I guess I'll branch that out because Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you mentioned type 1 diabetes, anything else, rheumatoid arthritis perhaps? I'm not sure.
Oh, actually, all autoimmune diseases respond to it, from lupus to arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis responds not so good. It takes more time. Probably because the arthritis keeps an inflammation ongoing, so it's one of the diseases that responds less well. But it actually works with all autoimmune diseases. There is a list. If you go to the page of the German physicians who do this protocol, there is a list of all the diseases that have been treated with it, and it's really long. It includes everything.
Is the carnivore diet or a low carb or ketogenic diet essential for the success of this, or can you do it on a standard Mediterranean diet or plant-based diet or something like that? What are your thoughts on that part?
Well, you can do it on a standard diet. You can do it on a standard diet, but for sure, keto helps and carnivore helps even more. I suggest if you can do it, do carnivore or at least keto and avoid the standard diet.
Yeah, fair enough. And as far as what your diet looks like today, just out of curiosity, what you mentioned you were keto carnivore. What are you eating these days? I guess in Italy.
Yes, but I eat beef and pork. I would say 50-50. And other than that, I eat eggs, maybe 5 or 6 eggs a week. And that's actually it. I eat once a month, I eat a piece of pineapple. I grill it, and I put some cinnamon on it, but that's it.
So you're not regularly including food or things like that in the diet.
No. I don't include.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are advocates for that now, and it may or may not be beneficial for certain people. Do you find you said you've only had one flare in 6 years, which is wonderful, I'm sure. Are there other signs or symptoms that you've noticed are better from this protocol? I mean, outside, I know people with CarnivoreDiet often know a whole host of things get better from mood, cognition, body composition, general inflammation, on and on and on. Do you find that the diet has impacted you positively in those ways? And does the vitamin D add to that and making a difference with regard to those things outside of the immune system modulation?
Well, so the diet impacted, as I said earlier, on my sleep, on my mood, concentration, the focus. And actually all these symptoms I discovered have in common one cause, and it's a deficiency in acetylcholine. Because acetylcholine is an extremely important neurotransmitter, and it's used in our body for many different functions. It's used in the neuromuscular junctions, so we need it to move and for strength. And it's used in the cholinergic centers of the brain. So, and these cholinergic centers of the brain regulate mood, they regulate, stimulate arousal and memory, concentration, and sleep. The center that regulates our sleep is dependent on acetylcholine. So, and it's used by our parasympathetic nervous system. So our autonomous nervous system, which is the nervous system that we don't control voluntarily, is divided in sympathetic and parasympathetic. The sympathetic is the fight or flight mode, let's say, and the parasympathetic is the rest and digest. And if we have a deficiency in acetylcholine, which is used by the parasympathetic, we shift towards the sympathetic nervous system, and we are in a constant fight or flight mode. So we are constantly anxious, we have a fast heart rate, we have a high blood pressure. And CarnivoreDiet fixed all these symptoms for me. And I think it fixes this deficiency of acetylcholine. And it does so by fixing the gut microbiome. Because to produce acetylcholine, and I discovered this by seeing a couple of interviews to a brilliant neurologist, Stasha Gominek, who has a protocol that heals the same symptoms that improve with carnivore. But she has another approach. She gives high doses of B vitamins and vitamin D. But to produce acetylcholine, you need acetyl coenzyme A, and a precursor of it is pantothenic acid, vitamin B5. And to produce it, we need also vitamin B1, B2, and B3. So these vitamins don't come from our diet. They come from our gut microbiome, mostly. And this is a crucial point. And I think that CarnivoreDiet fixes our gut microbiome. It feeds the healthy bacteria that produce these vitamins, and it starves the unhealthy bacteria that consume these vitamins, and it replenishes our reserve of acetylcholine.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm sure that, I have no doubt that the microbiome is playing a role in our health. Whether or not we can figure it out or not is debatable, but certainly I can't deny what I see with people switching their diets, and so it has to have some impact on that. I just kind of quickly looked up the Coimbra Protocol. Dr. Cicero Coimbra out of Sao Paulo came up with this. And he started out with 10,000 units and saw pretty significant improvement. He just kind of ramped up from there, so it's interesting to see. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I want to just give you an opportunity to share. If anybody wants to contact you, learn more about these types of things on your social media, can you share those for us?
Oh, yes, you can find me on Facebook, and my wife made Twitter for me and Instagram, but I don't use them actually. Yes, you can find me on Facebook. It's probably the easiest way. And I also have a personal internet page, but I don't know if it's active at the moment. So
Facebook is Facebook, and what do we type into Facebook to get there?
Oh, Leo Karl Hanke, my name, and you find me.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing this information, and wonderful to see you overcoming multiple sclerosis as well as all those other metabolic issues you've used, and hopefully this will inspire other people to maybe not settle for what they're being told is an outcome of just progression, no hope for whatever the autoimmune diseases. But I think we still struggle miserably to deal with that, and our approach is often just let's just shut down the immune system, immunomodulated drugs and suppressive drugs, which have a lot of potential negatives associated with that. Anyway, thank you so much. The rest of you guys, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks, Leo. Take care.
Goodbye. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.